Hello everyone, welcome back to The Third Take. Today we're going to be discussing Cuba.
So right now Cuba is facing an imminent threat of invasion from the US. As the nation continues to persist under harsh sanctions, a decades-long blockade, and a devastating fuel crisis, workers of Cuba continue to prove every day that it is solidarity and economies of care that will save us no matter what the threat is.
And I think something that would be really helpful for our viewers and for us is to recap the history of Cuba-US relations. One likes to think if you just listen to CNN or MS Now or Fox, really these days sometimes it's hard to differentiate between them. But if you just listen to them, you will think that Cuba and America have had these really tough times. They're very recent. There's no history. Castro comes to power and America's trying to save the Cuban people from Castro and his dictatorship, right? If you really look at the history, Cuba actually was under Spanish colonization for centuries. Spain went there, they conducted a genocide of the indigenous population of the Taino people. They tried to eradicate the Taino people, honestly. And even to this day, when DNA tests are done, it shows that the indigenous people of Cuba still persist. So it shows you that no matter how much somebody tries to genocide somebody, people are fighting back and they will persist.
Yeah, ethnic cleansing won't be the end of people's existence.
It won't be. And we see that in Canada, where the indigenous population went through a genocide, is currently going through a genocide again when it comes to indigenous women and girls and two-spirited folks. People will, at the end of the day, persist. And that resiliency and that strength is seen in Cubans today. So the Spanish not only went there and colonized and committed a genocide, they also brought in, at its peak, 700,000 slaves who were African slaves. People who were abducted and kidnapped from their countries and their lands and brought to Cuba, because Cuba was one of the pillars of the Spanish Empire's economy. So you have, at its peak, the Spanish Empire peak in Cuba alone, 700,000 African slaves. And these are people that were abducted, kidnapped from their lands, brought to Cuba by Spain to work in sugar plantations and also in the tobacco industry. So in these sectors, Spain made a lot of money, the Spanish Empire, the crown. And for the Spanish Empire, for their economy, Cuba was one of the pillars. Then comes the late 1800s, where America and Spain go to war because an American ship exploded off the coast of Havana. America goes to war with Spain. Spain loses. America comes in as we're gonna help you, but actually ends up crushing and decimating the Cuban independence movement,
right,
which was against the Spanish originally. Then America comes in we saved you, but also we don't want you to have independence. In the early 1900s, America basically bullied Cuba and forced them to sign over a lot of their sovereignty and economic rights. That is also how the base in Guantanamo, which is Guantanamo, that Guantanamo base was given to the United States by Cuba under duress in the early 1900s. From early 1900s to 1959, you basically had American direct and indirect control of Cuba's economy and sovereignty and everything, right? At one point, American corporations controlled 80% of most industries in Cuba?
Of course.
Can you imagine that? Well, we can in Canada at some point, but not to that extent. I'm not comparing the Canadian situation to the Cuban people.
But Taha, this is when we go from sort of this colonial era to this more neo-colonial era.
Absolutely.
Of Cuba's history.
Absolutely. On paper, it's you're independent. We saved you. In reality, you're independent, and as you said, neo-colonization, our corporations are going to control your food sector, your mining sector, basically everything in Cuba's economy, right? Even the casinos and the hotels. So that developed a ruling, land-owning, and when I say land-owning, I'm not just saying they had a house. I'm saying acres and acres and acres of land. This elite class in Cuba severely benefited from American capitalist injecture into their country. But at the same time, it created a class war between these elites, and then you had all the working class people, many of who were actually Afro-Indigenous Cubans or Afro-Latin people. In 1950s, there was this early on there was also a movement for independence from this elite and from American interference. But in 1959, led by the then commander Fidel Castro, who was a lawyer and came from one of these landowning elite families, wins the war against the Batista dictatorship regime. So Batista was in power until 1959, close American ally, ruthless dictator. He was so ruthless that Senator Ted Cruz in America, his family had to flee the oppression of the Batista dictatorship regime, not Fidel Castro. He talks about that in a recent interview, but he still blames Fidel. I'm like, okay. Marco Rubio, Bob Menendez, a lot of these people like to pretend that Fidel Castro hurt them. Actually, many of them escaped the Batista regime.
Right.
Fidel Castro wins this revolution, and it wasn't just Fidel's win. So Fidel Castro and the people of Cuba mount this revolution. They win, and in 1959, Cuba decides, you know what, we actually want to reform capitalism.
Right.
Fidel goes to the U.S. I think Eisenhower was the president. I might be wrong.
I think so.
And he refuses to meet with Fidel Castro. He sends his then Secretary of State, I believe, to go and meet with Fidel. So Fidel made an effort. He went to America after the revolution. He wanted to have good relations because Cuba is 90 miles from Florida.
No,
it's 90 miles.
It's right there.
It's right there. Like, you can see on the map like how far Key West, Florida is from Cuba. It's not that far, really. Because American administration at that point completely snubbed Fidel Castro, was like, we don't want to even talk to you, he goes back and he says, you know what, maybe we don't need to reform capitalism, maybe we should be communists. And he implements massive nationalization of industries. He implements land reform, which actually took all of that land that was unjustly held by the ruling elite and distributed it amongst people, right?
Yeah.
At that point, you had this mass exodus of the ruling elite. A lot of them fled to, you guessed it, Florida, where the Miami Cuban stereotype comes from. And to this day, these people say that their lands were confiscated and they were oppressed. Now, Fidel Castro's government actually paid the people for their land, but they paid them based off of their tax returns.
Oh.
So let's say all of this land here is mine, and on my taxes, this land is owned. Let's say this land is like, what did you say?
This land is your land.
This land is your land. Okay. So let's say all of this land that I have, it is worth $25 million.
Okay.
But on my taxes, as a rich Cuban at that point, as part of the elite, I say it's $1 million.
Oh.
So Fidel was like, I'm going off of the tax data because we can't just have you decide how much your land is worth. But a lot of these people lied on their taxes. So then they're upset, right? So it's like, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't have evaded taxes. Like, pay your taxes. Like, we all pay our taxes, right?
They didn't want to pay their fair share, and then they don't pay
they didn't want to pay their fair share, and then also complain about the poverty, and then also say that we are the ones creating jobs for all these people that are working as farmers and, you know, farm workers.
And then they want to get mad at a lack of compensation, even though there was an effort made.
They were compensated. Companies were compensated. The people individually were compensated for their lands and their different sectors. And, like, you choose to leave, right? So, like, you're leaving that behind. And recently, when Lubaba and I were in Cuba, we saw some of these mansions in the Miramar neighborhood, which is like the elite Beverly Hills kind of neighborhood.
Like the Yorkville of...
Oh God, not the Yorkville of Havana.
I felt like we were in Yorkville.
And it's like, you know, gorgeous houses, huge mansions. Some of them are still empty to this day. Right? Because those people never came back, and then they gave that mansion to their workers, like their servants or domestic help, whatever you want to say. And now it's going through the domestic help, like those people like own it. And I just feel like, you know, it's one thing to say that you're against an economic policy. It's another to completely portray it as an evil policy when it was meant to redistribute land. Right? And actually, according to the according to, I believe it's Ryan Grimm and Dropsite News' coverage, like Cuba was initially, the people wanted to kind of go ham at like the landowning class.
Right.
And it was Fidel and his government at that point that was like, you know what, actually, let's do it according to the law.
Oh.
So having said all of that, in 1962, JFK, the president of the United States at that point, John F. Kennedy, people love him, but he actually was the president that started the embargo and blockade on Cuba. So in 1962, he puts this blockade up. He basically this blockade is illegal. It's atrocious. It's long-standing. It's cruel. And it exists to this day, almost 7 decades, right? And the thing is that because you have these really rich people that moved to Miami and Florida, they became a really important and rich voting base.
Mm-hmm.
So what that does now is that for many elections until recently, Florida was a swing state.
Oh yeah.
So
we used to like Florida when watching the electoral map.
Well, we liked to watch Florida.
Yeah.
Sometimes Florida would disappoint, and other times it would be like, oh, that Florida was a swing state until recently, right? So this became a really important electorate. So you had every single American president catering to the Cuban elite in Miami who wanted Fidel Castro's regime or government or whatever administration to fall. But they not only wanted that. It's not about Fidel. It's not about Che Guevara.
No.
What it is that the American and the Cuban ruling elite wants access again to Cuban industries, sectors, farmland, mines, and coastal areas.
And in particular, like, it's the corporate greed motivated ideologies that are trying to win here over a people powered economic system.
Absolutely. And you see that throughout the world, right? Where you go to these countries and whether they're in West Africa, whether they're in South Asia, whether they're in Oceania, and you're like, these countries are so rich with natural resources, why are they not developing well? And then you see, oh, it's because they have independence, but the current government is bought and paid for and are puppets of insert Western colonial power, which still exists today. So France might not have an empire today, but has all these colonies indirectly or directly. America is the same way, UK the same way, right? And I think that's, just to end this part off, since 1962, what JFK started, since till today, American presidents have always been against the Cuban Revolution that happened, right? The only president that wasn't towards the end of his term was Barack Obama, who did try to normalize relations, but it was towards the last month or two of his administration. So then when Trump won, he immediately went back and placed sanctions back on Cuba, right? But there was this small period of hope. And during this entire time, Cuba heavily relied on the Soviet Union until the Soviet Union collapsed, because it was one of Cuba's main trading partners. Soviet Union collapses in the 90s. Cuba went through what's called the special period, really struggled economically, invested a lot of money into the tourism sector. But now there are critics of the Cuban government in Cuba that say maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. Maybe you should have invested more in wind farms, solar farms, etc., which Cuba is doing now. And, that's for another episode where we can discuss that. But I think what's important to keep in mind is where Cuba is today, whether it's the people that are suffering because of the blockade, whether it's people there not getting access to certain medications, no matter what is happening there, the primary reason for that is the US blockade on Cuba, which as of today exists of 243 laws and counting. And considering, the United States and especially Marco Rubio and his never-ending lustful wishes for the demise of the Cuban Revolution, these sanctions might even be getting worse to an extent where we might even see an invasion of Cuba.
Right, and that's really what the threat is right now, and what the main imminent concern is for a lot of Cubans, right? There's crippling sanctions that make the lives of everyday Cubans very difficult. The average salary right now of a Cuban worker who works full-time might be something like 4,000 to 5,000 Cuban pesos a month. In USD, that's something like $20 USD or less, right? And that's if you have reliable income, that's if you have the ability to work full-time, that's if you are working, whatever it is. So the impacts of the blockade now are that the salary of the average Cuban worker is very meager, right? It covers your basics, it covers what you need, but also Cuba exists in an economy where you don't necessarily have to have money in your pocket in order to get your necessities met, right? That is the premise of this economy of care. And so since they're in a fuel crisis right now, the blockade in particular over the last 6 months has really intensified the fuel crisis in Cuba. So right now folks are having a hard time just getting across the island to get to work, to get to school, to get to the hospital, right? And since January 3rd, since the Venezuelan leader Maduro's kidnapping in January, many Latin American countries have been absolutely terrified about normalizing relations or maintaining relations with Cuba because of this threat of another kidnapping or whatever the US wants to do to their leaders as well. I mean, Maduro was kidnapped because they provide resources, particularly oil and other energy related resources to Cuba. And so because they were a main trading partner for Cuba, they were a main target for the US to go after in order to hurt Cubans further. Right, and so now other Latin American countries, particularly Chile, and we're also seeing, and so since these world leaders in other Latin American countries are afraid of being kidnapped themselves, or worse, having other, threats to their country and to their people, now we're seeing, countries like Chile back out of their support of providing different supplies and imports for Cubans. We're also seeing world leaders like Lula in Brazil, taking pictures, smiling and shaking hands with Trump. It's really difficult now for Cuba to be able to survive and have a functioning, reliable energy system. And so they're coming up with different tactics of being able to address this. I know you're going to talk about this a little more, Taha, but I think something that's really incredible about Cuba is that, even though a large amount of their energy is provided by even though a certain amount of their energy is provided by solar power now, as well as other renewable sources, they do predominantly rely on oil in order to be able to power their systems and keep their energy system going, and they've been able to make sure that they can refine their crude oil fully in-house, and so their energy system overall is completely independent of the US. However, right now resources are scarce, and that's what's creating this crisis, and the blockade is deepening that. Like I said, the economy that Cubans have created, that the people have created, right? Not just, Castro, not the current president, Diaz-Canel, not, whatever leader.
It's not one person.
No, it's not one person. It is the people as a collective, the almost 11 million people that live in Cuba, that are the ones who have created these strong, firm, protective economies of care. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what these economies of care look like, how Cuba's social systems are created to protect and care for their people.
Absolutely, and I think we're not saying that like Lula is pro-Trump. We're saying that Lula from Brazil, the leader of Brazil, and then also like Claudia Sheinbaum from Mexico, who's a leader there, like everybody's tiptoeing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Mexico tried to send oil, and then America threatened them, and then they were like, fine, we won't. But then Mexico sent other things, right?
Exactly.
And Cuba's even saying, we'll buy the oil. We're not asking for charity.
No.
But like,
and this is a heavily
America's
impoverished
not
country.
letting countries send or sell oil to Cuba. Russia is the only country that kind of evaded the sanctions and went anyway, because it's Russia.
Yeah, you have to be so powerful on a global stage to be able to do something like defy the states, right?
Exactly. So one of the ways in which Cuba has really tried to reform its economy or build its economy is through an energy transition. So one solar farm would be able to provide Cuba with some electricity, right? If they have around, I think 200, I might be, or 160 or 200, I might be off a little bit, it can power the entire island. Right? So China has been really helping Cuba now by providing this technology for solar power and building tons of farms for solar power and for that to be able to create electricity. And the amazing part is that just within a year, since 2025 until now, compared to the numbers in 2024, in 2025 and now, Cuba has gone from 5% of its sector coming from renewable energy to 10 to 20%.
Solar specifically.
And solar specifically, 10%, and then like 20% including other aspects of renewable energy. So I think that's primarily obviously with the help of Chinese supplies, but there is this reliance still on crude oil, because you can't think about Canada and Germany and Denmark and America, like these really rich, powerful, rich countries. It takes them so long to even talk about transitioning to green energy. Cuba has been made poor because of the US blockade. Cuba is struggling financially because of the US blockade, on almost 7-decade blockade on Cuba. So you actually need crude oil still for a lot of the basic things, right? So for the transportation, for functioning of hospitals, for the generators that they need, for tractors, for farm work. So that transition is still going to take some time.
Yeah.
And for that, they need oil. And that's the thing that America has been hampering down on.
Another really vital part of their social systems, in Cuba is, number 2, an inclusive and holistic healthcare system, right? In Cuba, everyone who needs healthcare has access to the system. Everyone. As part of its early revolution, the Cuban infant mortality rates were the major indicator that public health experts looked at in order to understand what it's one of the major indicators that we use globally in order to understand what the state of healthcare is like in a country, right? And so for Cuba, they really focused on making sure that their infant mortality rate rapidly declined in the first 5 years of its revolution. Nowadays, Cuba's medical advancements look like them being front runners when it comes to creating different vaccines, drugs, and interventions to be able to address different clinical issues, right? Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Cuba has kept their people safe and protected through their vaccine research and development, even with a shortage of supplies, particularly because of a lack of support from other countries, especially perpetuated by these sanctions imposed by the US and the overall blockade. Regardless of that, despite all that, Cuba was still able to make a COVID vaccine fully in-house, completely internal, and now they've continued to work on one of the newest Alzheimer drugs that is currently undergoing trial in Canada, actually, at the University of Saskatchewan. That drug is actually estimated to hit the market in Canada by 2030. So that's really exciting, and that's an incredible advancement in a world of disease and chronic illness where we have such limited interventions thus far.
Absolutely. And to add to all of that, the cherry on top is the incredible doctors that Cuba has. Their medical schools are internationally renowned and respected. Cuba, in 2005, when Pakistan had an earthquake, Cuba sent 2,500 doctors as a gesture of friendship. Cuba has done that all across the world to an extent where they just sent doctors to Italy, because there was a shortage of doctors in Italy.
Wow.
And the American representative or envoy or ambassador, whatever his title is, in Cuba, from Cuba, flies to Italy to try to convince the government there to not accept Cuban doctors, because it flies in the face of American propaganda, American state propaganda, not the people, about Cuba. So Cuban doctors are portrayed as slaves, the language of American state propaganda, or as people who are being trafficked and forced to work, and then the Cuban government takes their salaries.
Right.
That's not true. Cuban government actually allows for these exchange programs to happen, where Cuban doctors can go to Italy, they can go to other countries, work there, and in Italy, let's say if they're getting paid, for example, 2,000 euros, the government will take a cut of that, because the government is sending a doctor abroad.
Yeah.
So they need to fund their own healthcare system.
Yeah.
But that doctor still retains the rest of their salary, and their family also gets money in Cuba. So it's one of those things where the propaganda is so brutal that if you talk to everyday person, like sometimes they're not even willing to listen. But I hope that when people actually look into this, read what the United Nations reports are like about Cuban doctors, look at the different medical associations and how valued Cuban medical education and doctors are.
Yeah.
Cuban doctors are one of the only doctors in the world, one of the only ones that can move to the United States and immediately start working in the US without having to do all these exams that everybody else has to do.
Yeah.
What shows you that on one hand, it's like Cuban doctors, we can't trust them, we can't trust Cuban science, propaganda coming a lot of times from American state apparatuses. And then on the other end, you just accept the doctors from there, don't ask them to like, you know, do any sort of training or things like that because you trust them.
Yeah.
And this is for if the doctor was moving to America permanently, right? But so for an American envoy to fly to Italy to try to convince them to send the Cuban doctors back, cut that relationship, instead of just being like, we will help you, they're just like, no, we also want you to suffer and we want our own population to suffer, which we don't give healthcare to.
Why? To make a point, right?
To make a point. Apparently, before Wab Kinew, the premier of Manitoba, before that was a conservative, and also, I think, said no to Cuban doctors to come to Manitoba, which would have been transformational. I think if Canada is taking in medical research from Cuba and bringing it here because we want to treat Alzheimer's, which is incredible that will be able to be treated, or in the future, you know, addressed through a drug that Cuba is working on. Why can't we, you know, have more medical collaboration with Cuban doctors? When we know that their healthcare system is focused on prevention.
Yes, exactly.
Our healthcare system in Canada is not focused on prevention.
No, North America has this business-minded focus of healthcare, and that's what draws a lot of, you know, people who want to provide care, a lot of people who go into medicine and into being, you know, who go into medicine for the sake of being caregivers. It's what draws a lot of them away from the medical system because it's so business oriented. And Cuba has one of the only, even doctors also share this sentiment that, you know, they are really able to focus on these principles of care and just being good at what they do, and that is save lives, right? Because that is the focus of your job, not what is the business mindset of my profession.
Exactly. And if you just Google Belly of the Beast Cuban doctors, you'll be able to see this incredible documentary by the Belly of the Beast. Their work is incredible. Take a look.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. And speaking of healthcare, I want to also talk about education as somebody that is from that sector. Just like healthcare, Cuba also provides universal education. Are there people in Cuba that are unable to go to university because of economic issues? Yes. Are there people in Cuba that are able to go to university and graduate debt-free, even no matter what their family background is? Yes. Because Cuba actually makes sure that students get access to education. And again, any news that we're seeing about Cuban students struggling, Cuban doctors struggling, Cuban medical system struggling, vaccines going bad in hospitals because of power outages, who is creating this outage? Who? Why? It's the blockade implemented by the United States on a small island country like Cuba. Why? Because Cuba decided that they were gonna nationalize industries and create a system where land redistribution happened, where American corporations didn't control 70, 80, whatever % of the industries, where people of Cuba were in charge of their own destiny, their own sovereignty, their own economy, their own life, their own happiness. And for that one mistake that Cuba made, mistake in quotations, they're being punished by the US. And the other country that you see that's going through a very similar, but in a different way, hell, is Haiti, which is being punished to this day by the United States for overthrowing their slave masters, which were the French. And then America forced Haiti back in the day to pay France reparations. Can you believe being enslaved, finally fighting for your independence and your freedom and your liberty and your liberation, and then being forced to pay your slave owning masters and that class of people reparations? Because the biggest bully in the world, the United States, has decided that France lost revenue because now they don't have slaves in Haiti. What the hell? But the interesting thing I want to mention here is that Haiti went down a different route economically and Cuba went down a different route. Both are suffering because of the US, foreign policy, but at the same time, Cuba, despite all of that, is doing its best to provide, through this socialist revolutionary economic structure, societal structure, education and healthcare to all its citizens to the best of their ability, right? Are there issues in the government? I want to ask you, are there issues in your province and government? Is everybody watching this in America happy with their governors in their states or their president? Are we in Canada happy with the premiers of our province, or with the new diet conservative liberal prime minister that we have? No, a lot of us are unhappy, but that doesn't mean that we deserve a blockade from the world's biggest superpower to force us into submission. And Cubans are very determined. They're fighting back, and they're saying, you know, they have this saying, they're patria o muerte, which means like homeland or death.
I think it really goes to show also that the US empire is really hanging on by a very thin thread. In order to preserve the US empire, they have no choice but to go after these small island countries that are proving them wrong completely, that capitalism doesn't work, that their mixed market economy that doesn't work, that whatever market systems that they come up with for their economies do not work, and they do not protect people, they do not provide care for people, they put people into poverty, and they expand inequality, right? Cuba's economy, Cuba's society has proven, amongst other countries, right? But the US's system, it does not have to be the only one. It is not the only choice. There is an alternative, and there are many of them, but that the alternatives effectively work. That this propaganda that's meant to brainwash people into submission, even within the US, it is working overtime to make people believe that, because it is the only chance that the US empire has to stay standing right now. That is the thin string that it is holding on to, the suppression of information, knowledge, and personal agency.
And I think something I want to also focus on, and everything you said, completely true, right? And I want to say that Cuba's literacy rate was really bad because of the elite that used to be there. They would have like basically a working class and then an elite class, right?
And like particularly in that neo-colonial period,
absolutely,
going out of there.
Absolutely. And in Cuba, once the revolution happened in 1959, what the government did is create literacy programs, critical literacy programs, mass literacy programs to go and educate everyday people and peasant workers. That's literally what the people were called, right? Like, you had these children who were teenagers from bigger cities going and volunteering their time, working on plantations with these workers, teaching them how to read and write, looking at like the numerical and, you know, reading, writing, every form of literacy. And they became this incredibly literate country with extremely high levels of literacy and education. But they are struggling because like the US has a blockade on them.
Yeah.
Because it goes against the American model of education, which is all privatization, which is what is creeping into Canada now through Ontario's leader Doug Ford, or Daniel Smith's leadership in Alberta and other places in Canada, right? And then you also have the agriculture and food industries in Cuba, which are all the workers there are either part of a union or they're part of worker-owned cooperatives. What this means is that if you're a union member, you're represented by a union representative to ensure that you have all your workers' rights met. If you think this is too communist, I would love for you to give up your weekends, which were won in Canada and other countries by unions. Weekends only exist, you know, that 2-day period when people are like, oh my God, finally, because of unions and the labor movement. In Cuba, unions represent the workers, or the workers are part owners in those farms and in those businesses. I would love for you to imagine you going to work at a toy factory and knowing that you're a part owner. Like, think about that, you know? And people say this would never work, too many cooks spoil the broth, how are decisions even made? Cuba is showing how that can be done. Some parts in Spain and Italy, in Emilia-Romagna in Italy and in Mondragon in Spain, show how worker-owned cooperatives can work.
Absolutely.
Cuba on a national scale is showing how that can work. But why is it struggling now? Because of the US blockade. So when everything Cuba decided to do kind of goes against this model of capitalist greed, capitalist overlords, oligarchs controlling everything and then giving you crumbs, that's something that Cuba's like, we actually don't have to live like that.
Exactly.
And if the thing is that, oh, they're communist and they're evil and they're bad, why is America trading with Vietnam? The Communist Party of Vietnam exists there. That's leading the country.
Okay.
Why does America want everything from China? They import a lot of Chinese stuff. They want China to buy a lot of their stuff. China is a communist country, right? It's run by the Communist Party of China. We can debate if it's communist or not. I'm not getting into that with everybody watching this. But, they're a communist country. So you see why America wants to invade Cuba, because it wants to make an example of yet another country. How dare you defy us and go against us? And most of all, guys, I am telling you, Cuba can have a similar form of government or do whatever, or the same people can be in power as long as American corporations and ruling elite can access their coastal areas, their industries, their beaches, their mines, their natural resources. Everything will be fine. Yeah. But why should Cuba give that up? We in Canada have recently been talking a lot about our own sovereignty.
Yes.
How we need to be sovereign. We need to fight back against American encroachment. And it's like, okay, why are you not able to understand that in Cuba's case? And I actually give a lot of Canadians credit. Canadians do understand that about Cuba, which is why we will do another episode on why Canadian Airlines canceling flights to Cuba makes no sense. Mm-hmm. It's not about the fuel shortage, trust me. But I want to hand it back to you to Andasolf to talk more about, some parting thoughts that you want to share.
Yeah, Taha, it's exactly how you said. This entire country, this island nation, is being fueled by this worker-led revolution of kindness and community, right? These are some of our last, and not to be dramatic, but these are some of our last chances left at saving our humanity, right? We're to be able to really keep it intact and preserved, right? When we were in Cuba, that's all I felt like I could see in the people, their humanity, their kindness. I didn't question it, and they didn't question it in me. When we're in Canada, when we're in this capitalist machine, when we are in the belly of the beast, it's almost as if that's the uphill battle you're fighting every single day to prove that your humanity should be important, right? We can do it. It takes a lot out of us, right? It's like our revolutions are intertwined in each other, right? The idea of being able to create economies of care like this, like I said, is led by the people. We talk about this a lot at Spring Socialist Network, and Taha and I talk about this a lot amongst our friends, but there is no politician out there that is going to be willing to do what we are not willing to do ourselves as individuals, as workers, right? And that's what Cuban people prove every day, that they are willing to do what they know is right, what is necessary in order to protect these systems of care that they've created, in order to protect their country that is made out of these systems. That's what their sovereignty looks like. And I think that really shows how, Cuban people see the collective stake that they have in one another, right? That's what we have to learn from them, how to see our collective stake in one another and prove our solidarity to each other, devote our solidarity to each other, right? Prove that by shaping our economies, our mindsets, and our societies with solidarity and love, that they can be functional and successful, right? On May 1st, on May Day this year in Havana, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel showcased an open letter, a declaration that millions of Cubans had signed, saying that there was an invasion of any kind by the U.S., that they would be willing to put their lives on the line for the country in order to protect their homeland. In a country of 10.8 million people, there were 6.23 million people, basically 6.25 million people in this one tiny country that signed this declaration saying that they were willing to put their lives on the line for their homeland to protect what they have and what they've created. What other country in the world do you know that has an army of 6.2 million people?
I mean, and like relative to the size.
Of course, exactly,
right?
Absolutely.
It's like 60% of the country is signing a letter saying, over 60% is saying we will defend our country.
Yeah.
And
we can't even get that many people to participate in an election here.
Oh my gosh, don't get me started about people not voting. Not that voting is everything, but it is something, guys.
It is.
It's a start.
Yeah, it's a bare minimum, right? Yeah. Like it's like one barrier that we have in order to participate and engage in our society, and Cuban people have taken it that much further. Right?
And I can already hear the critiques of this episode, and sure, critique us, share in the comments what you feel, what you think, but at the same time, I want you to keep in mind every story that you will share, I know a person in Cuba that says that their salary is not enough and they have to go on the black market to get something. Think about why that is happening. Why is there a fuel shortage? Why are people banging pots and pans in Havana asking for more fuel? Why is that? Why are there electricity blackouts, power outages? Why is it that vaccines are going bad in freezers and fridges and in hospitals across Cuba? Because the United States has taken it upon itself to try to dismantle the Cuban Revolution. And I think until we reckon with that, no matter what you say, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Because you're focusing on individuals who are inexplicable, who are at the end of the day being hurt by a massive bully superpower, nuclear armed power in the world. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind when we're taking in news about Cuba from sources that are not very friendly to the global south a lot of the times. And just keep in mind, like, now there's all this news like Cuba has 300 drones that they got from Iran and Russia. Okay, now America is saying because they have those drones, we might have to go in and attack them. Like, when I say America, I'm not saying American people, I'm saying like the government, the Trump regime, the Trump administration, the Epstein regime, whatever you want to call them. They're the ones that are saying because Cuba has these drones, it's a threat to Florida, to Key West, to Miami, etc. So we have to go and attack Cuba. Right. Well, how about you just don't attack Cuba?
Yeah.
And then they won't use the drones. Yeah. How about we start there?
Yeah.
It's like when Rihanna was asked once, I can't believe I want to say this, but Rihanna was once asked on the red carpet, what do you look for in a man? And she was like, I'm not looking for a man. How about we start there? Right? So with Cuba, it's like Cuba's not looking for war. Cuba continues to say we're a country of peace. We want to trade. We want to live. We want to be happy. We want people to come and visit our country.
Cubans want to go to school and learn how to be lawyers and like doctors and artists and writers and just live their lives, right?
Yeah. And clowns. I'm not even joking. Yes. Like we literally met a child. Well, I met a child in Cuba in a school, and they were like, what's your favorite subject? And the kid is like, oh, math and physics. And then what do you want to be? And the kid is like, I want to be a clown. Yeah. And I started laughing, and then I found out from the teacher, like, no, the kid actually goes to clown school after that. But these kids and their schooling is being affected because of the blockade, because the school now starts at 8:30 and ends at 12, right? So there's a lot of people suffering, millions of people are suffering for the greed and eggplant measuring contest of some men.
Oh my God.
In Florida and DC.
Yeah.
And that needs to really, really, really stop.
Like the personal vendetta of corporate powers and the ruling class they are not entitled to be able to do this to the global south and to the people of the world. And
I mean, I will say again, my country of origin, I have critiques of that country all the time. Over my dead body, I would ever go online and say, what's a great idea? Invade Pakistan. Absolutely not. What do you mean? Human beings live there like any other country. Forget even my association to the people I love that live there. Human beings live there. Yes. Like, what do you mean? Like, why are we invading countries to begin with? Why do we have these imperialist goals? It's very much the Monroe Doctrine that America had during the Cold War, where they don't want any communist or socialist influence in their hemisphere, which has now become the Donroe Doctrine of Donald Trump. And I think it just needs to end. And do you have anything to add, or can we end here?
With that.
Yeah. So I just want to say we will be making more videos on Cuba in the coming weeks and months. Mm-hmm. Please bear with us.
There's lots to discuss.
If you're an editor in the Greater Toronto area and you would like to help us, please let us know, because we are trying to edit things and put them out there, but editing is what takes us weeks. But at the same time, we want to thank you all for listening, watching or listening, or both, to The Third Take. My name is Taha.
And my name is Lubaba.
You can find us on Instagram at The Third Take Pod. You can follow us on there. You can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. Like and subscribe. If you want to share this episode with a friend, whether you agree or disagree, that would be great. And rate us 5 stars on Spotify.
and ask a friend what they think about these economies of care. What do you think it would look like if we integrated economies of care like this into our world?